Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Platform. I'm your host, Tony Montgomery, and with us today we have returning guest, Paul Oneid. He is one of the co-owners of Metrilife, which is an app that allows you to kind of keep track of your subjective day-to-day feedback on how you're doing with sleep, stress, recovery, all those things that are great to pair up with the objective feedback of your training markers. And he's also a strength coach with a master's in exercise science from the University of South Florida. Welcome to the show, buddy.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, I see that you have the beanie on, so it must be cold up there in Canada.
It is. Well, today it's about zero, but it's been in the minus 10, 12, 15 for the last little bit.
Celsius or Fahrenheit?
Celsius.
Okay.
Well, once you get below, I don't know, I think it's minus 10 or 15, it close to matches. I'm not really sure I know that 32 is zero.
32 is zero, you're right, yeah. It's, I just assume Canada is just cold all the time. I don't ever think that you guys have like a summer up there.
We have a pretty nice summer. Well, where I am, it's a pretty nice summer. We definitely get 4 distinct seasons for sure.
Yeah. Do you enjoy that? I don't know if I would enjoy that. And also, mind you, my Canadian culture is based off of South Park. So
yes,
that's where it stops and starts for me. So very ignorant to the Canadian outlook of things.
I like having the seasons, especially like fall and spring are really beautiful with the fall, with the changing of the colors and everything like that. And I have a cottage out on a lake, so it's nice to get out there and relax. Plus, sweatshirt and shorts weather is probably my favorite because I don't have to sweat all day long. But you can miss me with that minus 20 shit. Like it's gross.
Yeah, I wouldn't even leave my house. I would never leave my house. It would be debilitating to even think about it. Like when I lived in Denver for a little bit, anytime it snowed, it was very much a contemplation of it better be life or death for me to leave this house because I'm not wanting to do it at all.
The windows on my truck froze shut the other day.
No, thank you. I had a friend, my first mentor in Colorado, super wealthy guy. He was a cancer doctor, and he had his garage floors heated.
Yep.
So he would just turn that on, and every time he got into his car, his Range Rover, it was like warm and nice and perfect. And I was like, then he had his bathroom floors heated as well. I was like, this is the best idea ever. I would have never even thought of stuff like that.
I have a client who did that with her gym. She built an extension on her 2-car garage. So it's essentially like the same size as her 2-car garage in the back. She's got cork flooring and it's all heated.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
That is the worst. Cold bars, cold gym. You feel like you just aged another 30 years and you don't want to do anything that's hard.
Yeah, that was the first, when I first moved back to Ontario, end of March, beginning of April, I was training in my buddy's garage. So April was still like minus 2 or 3, and I was training in the garage. I brought in a little space heater and my hoodie, and I got my training in, so that was the bonus when everyone else was locked down. But wasn't ideal by any means.
No,
that's why I put my gym in my basement and not my garage.
It's smart, man. That way you have central heat in there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Oh, man. So I wanted to have you on so we can talk a little bit about nutrition and kind of the basis of nutrition, where some of the thought processes in going into starting a nutrition plan. Like, what do you look for first when starting with a client in terms of maybe red flags or detriments to starting a diet? And then what are some of the things that you first implement beyond the diet itself with a client that you're getting for the first time?
That's a really good question. So when I get a new client, I ask them, I have an intake questionnaire, then I also request a food log. And depending on their experience level with tracking, like using a tracking app on their phone, some red flags I would look at are like, do they have experience using a tracking app? Are they even willing to use one? And then knowing that those are not the only means from which to provide accountability or to control the diet. I look at protein. Are they getting enough protein? Are they eating an adequate amount of calories? And I always look at, and it's kind of funny, I was talking about this the other day. is their food log representative of their physique? And that might sound bad, but if I have a person who comes to me and they are very overweight and their goal is weight loss, and their food log shows that they're eating 1,400 calories a day, I know that that's not real, right? Because you cannot, it's thermogenically impossible to be obese eating consistently 1,400 calories a day.
Right.
So those additional calories are coming from someone else. So that's a huge red flag. The other is habits.
Before you expand on that, when you say that's a red flag, what are some of the things that could cause that to be like a red flag? Like in my mind, when you say 1,400 calories and they're not losing weight, then I'm thinking you're in such a deficit that you're not able to adhere to the plan. So you're constantly going on this on-off cycle of overeating and then back on the diet the next day,
Right.
overeating and back on the diet the next day. So I think being able to start a plan with the idea that you can adhere to it is the most important. I think a lot of newer people, they think like low calories right off the bat. And I know a lot of people that preach that as well. It's like, you want to do a calorie deficit over an exercise deficit. And it's like, well, it depends, right? It depends on where their current calories are and what the goal is, right? The goal is to try to improve their rested metabolic rate if they are at a 1,400 calorie area and they're not able to make any progress. And the only way to increase someone's rested metabolic rate is going to be to increase their calories and increase their amount of energy expenditure.
Right.
You know, so it's like, well, let's increase your calories, let's increase your energy expenditure, and let's see if we can get things moving in the right direction. Do you have anything else beyond that?
So just to elaborate on that though, they're not actually eating 1,400 calories a day. Because if they're eating 1,400 calories a day, 4 days a week, and then the other 3 days a week, they're eating 5,000.
Right. The weekly average is going to be way more.
Exactly. So that's what I'm looking at. So the reality of the fact is they're not in a caloric deficit chronically. So what I'll try to do is let them know, hey, I would much rather you eat 200 calories extra each day than go over by 1,500, 1,600 calories on one single day, because that will allow us to increase our metabolic rate. And I do a lot of education in that regard. And that also brings into account their habits, right? Yeah. So like, what are your habits around food? I don't like using the word relationship with food because I find it to be overblown. And it's just, how do you look at food? Do you look at food strictly as a fuel? Do you look at it as a really nuanced thing that's part of our culture and involved in a lot of our social structures, and it should be appreciated in that regard? Or do you look at it as an emotional crutch? So like, I'm getting all of this from this questionnaire to look at overall, how does this person view food within their life?
Yeah.
How do they use it in order to achieve whatever goal that they've set forth? Where are they having fallbacks? Where are they missing the boat? Are they really sedentary? Are they only training a couple times a week? Are they not walking and getting any steps? Is their sleep really poor? Do they have a very stressful occupation? That's one thing I look at as a whole. It's like, who is this person, right? Because until you understand who the person is, you're not really going to know what type of plan they can adhere to. Right. And having a lot of tools in your toolbox to know that I don't have to have this person track their macros. I don't have to have this person eating 6 meals a day. I don't have to do X, Y, Z thing that Men's Health says that we have to do in order to lose weight. We just have to find a plan that they can adhere to and then make very subtle modifications as we go. So in terms of red flags, like I said, I'm looking at, is their food log representative of their actual intake? Do they have binge eating behaviors or overeating behaviors? Are they over restricting? Are they over consuming? What is the quality of the food they're eating? Are they prioritizing single ingredient whole foods, or are they, shopping the aisles and eating a lot of packaged processed foods? How's their lifestyle, training, stress, things like that? The big rocks. Yeah. Right? Because as soon as you start flipping over big rocks, there's, fill your cup with big rocks, fill in the spaces with the pebbles, and then there's a little bit of sand left over. Right? Yeah. If you start filling your cup with sand, you're not going to get very far.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And you said within all that, the way they look at food is something that you look for. So is there, in your mind, an ideal approach to how to look at food to best create that relationship, so to speak, with food that allows them to not have food be such a devastating part of their life, but an equal contributor to reaching their goals and life fulfillment as well, the quality of their life.
Right. So I try to always preach that there is no good or bad. There's only trade-offs. So if you are going to follow a nutrition plan and then on the weekend it's your nephew's birthday and you want to have a piece of cake, realizing that that one piece of cake within the grand scheme of your nutrition plan isn't going to set you back. What might set you back is the fact that you had that piece of cake, felt guilty, continued to eat the cake, then felt guilty about that. So you stressed about it and then you over-exercised the next day. And then it rolls on. So the ideal scenario for someone who looks at food is that food is fuel. Food is also part of our culture and our social structure. So if you can find some sustainable ways that work for you to continue to enjoy those foods on an intermittent basis, obviously, eating cake every day probably won't get you to where you want to go in the long term.
Right.
But knowing that it's okay to indulge once in a while, and there are strategies you can use to account for it. So for myself, I really don't like tracking meals that aren't quote unquote on my plan. So what I'll do is I will eat my assigned macros all day, every day. And if I want to indulge in something, I indulge in something, not some. And that's been the hardest adjustment for me because I'm a fat kid at heart, right? I want to eat everything.
Right.
But I also know that the first bite tastes way better than the 30th. And that 30th bite is going to taste really shitty tomorrow when I feel like crap.
Yeah.
So I've made that association in my mind. I've played that risk reward in my mind. And, one cookie is great. And I know I'm going to feel good the next day. 40 cookies, not so great. Probably feel bad the next day. So it's having a balance. And maybe your balance is you account for those calories in your macros. For you, you have to be on plan. You know that mentally you have to be on plan. So cool. I'm going to track that first thing in the morning. I'm going to put in my app that I want to have a piece of cake later. And then I'm going to eat the rest of the day like a budget. Right?
Yeah.
If you're trying to lose weight and you have a timeline or you're in a weight restricted sport like powerlifting, that's usually my guidelines for people. It's like, hey, you got to meet 10 weeks from now or 8 weeks from now. Let's keep those habits in place. Let's be on track. If you want to have that treat, you better account for it. But if we're in the off season, have your treat.
Right. Flexibility within their, yeah. I think that's so important. And I think also too, what you touched upon is really good when it comes to the thought process of eating, right? Like you have a cookie and you'll just continue to eat the next cookie before you even taken the time to really fully be aware of how good that cookie tasted. And then next thing you know, you're 30 cookies in and you're not even eating because it tastes good anymore. You're just eating to eat. And I think being able to have that type of self-awareness of asking yourself those type of questions is like, man, this is really good. Am I truly enjoying each bite of this? Am I taking the time to enjoy each bite? And I think that's important to do with any meal that you have, let alone just the ones that may push you over the edge in terms of a slight binge eating disorder, right? I think the idea of learning to enjoy every bite of every meal not only is going to allow you to digest the food better, but it's also going to start to bridge that gap between, am I really hungry or am I just eating because I'm bored? What does satiety look like? What does palatability feel like? Like those things are so important to think about, but we just constantly just consume. We don't ever take the time to think while we're consuming. And I think that's so important because it creates a little bit more value in the food that you're eating as well, because you have that connection between your body and your mind and the food that you're eating.
Well, you said it actually on a previous episode of Coach's Corner with Trevor talking about holiday eating. Most of the times in which we're put in these positions, like if you're someone who's diligent with your nutrition, we can account for the fact that 90% of the time you're going to be diligent with your nutrition.
Right.
But there are events that come up that, there is more temptation or it's part of the social structure of whatever you're participating in. Food is secondary to the experience of being with people.
Should be.
So if you are present in the experience of being with people and enjoying everyone around you and taking in the humor and enjoying that experience, you're not going to want to overeat because the more food's in your mouth, the less you can talk. Right.
Right.
And that's kind of the approach that I've been preaching to my clients over the course of the holidays. Like, Yeah, absolutely. You should enjoy your meal. Eat mindfully, prioritize protein. There's always good quality foods at these family meals, but it's a family meal or a
Right.
friend meal. Like, enjoy that, be present in that, make the food secondary.
Yeah.
I love that. I love when you said that. That was
Yeah.
great.
That's so true, man, because I went out the other day and had some dinner, and the conversation was so good that we were like an hour in, and I realized like I'm not even hungry. Like I barely ate
Yep.
anything, but I'm full. I'm satisfied because the experience was the most important thing. So I think just that whole experience in general, you can create, right? You can create the experience by asking yourself those questions throughout your habits of eating, right? Am I enjoying this bite, or am I just eating because it's in front of me? Am I enjoying who I'm with, or am I just eating because I'm a little bit bored and not really paying attention to the conversation? Those are things that you should be asking yourself. Some type of introspection within your food can go a long way, I think, which is something that, from a psychological perspective, doesn't really get talked about a lot with nutrition coaches and clients, being able to advise them on some of these more nuanced things within themselves that they can do to not only view food differently, but view their experience within that food capacity differently as well, right?
Well, food is more than just three numbers in a calorie count, right? Like,
Right.
it's so much more. Like, our food is fuel, food is medicine. Food is like the building blocks from which your body is regenerating itself. That, like, you want to get all woo woo with it, but it's meaningful. What you
Right.
are, what you eat, right? So if I want to be a healthy, high performing person, I'm going to want to put food in there that allows me to do that. Whether, and we know that that's going to be, high quality proteins, single ingredient whole foods. We can argue about fiber and vegetables if we want to, but probably want to have some fruits and vegetables in your diet and eat a variety. If you can
Yeah.
do that, then, I mean, nutrition is super simple when you boil it down. There are a few, like, principles that you can live by, and if you do that, it's going to be really hard to get fat and to perform badly.
True. True. I mean, if you're just solely focused on how you perform in the gym, then you're going to eat to fuel that. And if you're training really hard, you're right. It's really hard. That's one of the things although Dan's gotten fat over the years, Dan Green. But when I
I wouldn't
first,
call him fat, but yeah, okay. I get it.
he's gotten bigger over the years. But he would always say it's almost impossible to get fat if you're training hard. And I would agree. Like it's definitely hard to do that for sure, because it's hard to train hard if you're eating like shit, because you don't even want to go to the gym. Your back pumps are through the roof. You have high blood pressure, probably because you're holding a bunch of water. So I think having that shift into performance is something that can be very, very crucial to the person. Something you talked about too, which get into a little back and forth on, is you saying like single ingredients foods is your preferred choice when it comes to nutrition, and to stay away from the processed food. And then you'll have people within the it was a flexible dieting crowd, the if it fits
Mhm.
your macros crowd. They may argue, the unintelligent ones may argue that a calorie is just a calorie, and you can eat whatever as long as it fits within your day. So, in your mind, what does processed foods do in a negative manner for the individual, and why should people avoid those?
So I don't necessarily think that you need to avoid them like the plague, but I would say that the majority of your diet should be composed of single ingredient whole foods. And the reason for that, the more processed a food is gonna be, the less micronutrients it's gonna have. The other thing is the easier it's gonna be digested by your system, so the quicker it'll go through. You typically will get a higher insulin response. You'll get a much stronger postprandial hunger response. You won't stay full as long. And then when you switch over to whole foods, you're going to get those micronutrients. You're going to get those fibers. You're going to get those phytochemicals. You're going to get your vitamins and minerals from your meats. These are all things that we need. So from a thermodynamics perspective, yes, a calorie is a calorie, but the power behind that calorie matters, because if I'm eating, we'll say 3,000 calories of whole foods, and hitting my protein numbers, the volume of food that's going to be is much larger than 3,000 calories of processed food, as even if we equate for the macros, right? So if I'm dieting, which am I going to prefer? I'm going to prefer to eat more food.
Right.
And then when we're trying to gain weight, that's when we can start to include some of those processed foods later on in the diet when appetite dwindles, because eating that volume of food is quite challenging. I try to do that through maximizing the peri-workout nutrition. And that's where I like shove a ton of nutrients into my clients if they're trying to gain weight, while still getting them to prioritize those whole foods. But, I don't think that there's anything inherently unhealthy when you equate protein and calories with processed food. They're not going to have as much nutrient density to them, and they're probably not going to do as much for you from a health perspective. But if you want to have those periodically, I think that's fine. That's where I would agree with the flexible dieting, that 80-20 rule. If you look at it as 80% of the time I'm on plan and 20% I'm not, that's bullshit, because that 20% is going to be way worse than your 80.
Yeah.
But if your 100% is intact, I usually let my clients say, okay, as long as 80% of the food that you're eating is high quality whole foods, you're hitting your macros, then 20% can be fun foods, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's where the balance comes in for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of the research that I've seen on processed food is another reason why I asked that question. There was some research done on energy expenditure when it came to whole food versus processed food. And the actual group that had whole food, even though macronutrients were pretty much identical, had more energy expenditure throughout that meal process. And
that's thermic effective food. Yeah, for sure.
Right. Which I found super interesting. Maybe it could be not only the thermic effect of food, but the fact that your body, you're chewing it more, you have to digest it a little bit more, those type of things as well. And then also too, there was another study where they took processed food and they had unprocessed whole food, single ingredients, and they allowed people to eat ad libitum to see which one would create more of a hyper palatable, which you kind of talked about, right? And the actual processed food group ate 500 calories more on average than the group that wasn't processed, right? So that idea of hyperpalatability is going to create the urge to want to continue to eat is something that's been backed by science too. And another thing that goes beyond calories in versus calories out is inflammation, right? Inflammation within your stomach. How do these processed foods contribute to your digestive process? If you look at the package and there's ingredients on there and you can't fucking pronounce the name, that's probably not going to sit well within your stomach, right? And if you can't digest the food and you have stomach issues, which can lead to IBS, which can lead to SIBO, which can lead to all these negative ramifications that can increase your ability to have insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes and all these other issues, that goes well beyond a calorie in versus a calorie out. So making sure that you find foods that not only digest well with you, but that also you process perfectly as well too.
Right. So here's a message for coaches, is that it's important for you to have that knowledge, but how you convey that knowledge to your clients is going to be really important, because you don't want to put them in this like fear state of like, oh my God, I'm doing damage to myself or anything like that. And we also need to remember that, that insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, all those things, one of the best ways to avoid those things is a caloric deficit.
Yep.
So if we're choosing foods that allow us to maintain a caloric deficit, those foods are probably going to be better for our gut health, which are probably going to be, right? So you use that big rock of single ingredient whole foods, and that covers up all of those, negative health ramifications down the line. So I do my best to convey that, surface level information of inflammation, insulin resistance, things like that. But I cover it with the veil of single ingredient whole foods being better for the system. With my more advanced client, like I do have some beginner clients who've never tracked before, and I have some like high level clients who know exactly what they're doing and they just need me to dial them in. I'll let them know, I'll educate them on that process, but it's almost like a tiered approach to the education, right? Because if someone doesn't really understand why I'm getting single ingredient whole foods, whereas I have someone else who's already eating them and wants to know how they can continue to optimize their health and performance, it's a big difference on how you convey that message.
Right, for sure. One of the things I want to dive a little bit deeper in that you just brought up is this idea of conveying the message of not demonizing anything and not speaking in such binary terms to the individual so that they feel like this is the only way they can lose weight, which I feel a lot of people do, right? You have
Yeah.
the no carb zealots where it's like you can't lose weight if you have carbs within your diet. So then they go on a diet and they lose weight because they're in a deficit, not because they're not having carbs. And they think like, this is the only way I can lose weight. So every time they diet from then on out, it goes to that mind process of this is the only way I can do it. So how do you go about that? Maybe educating your clients on those type of things to where they fully understand that a calorie deficit is the only thing that actually matters when it comes to weight loss. And there's no negative connotations with any of the things that we have unless their blood work deems otherwise, right?
Right. So the big thing that I try to hit home initially, and like my initial intake email for clients, like 3 pages long of a Word document, trying to like portray as much information as I can. And it's, if you're continuing to have to diet, you haven't found a diet that works for you. Number one,
Yeah,
because if you did, you'd still be following it. And number two is the way in which you lose the weight is going to be the way in which you maintain your weight loss. When we take these very binary approaches of either no carbs, no fats, carnivore, keto, paleo, whatever, if that's not a way that we like to eat, as soon as we stop dieting or determine that we're done our diet, we're going to revert to the strategies that we feel better on. So a lot of the work initially with a client is finding ways in which they can follow the diet and adhere to it easily. We're not trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. I'm trying to meet them where they are and then let them know that, what we're doing right now is we're setting the foundation for your maintenance. We're setting the foundation for how we're going to achieve your goal and maintain it. I don't give a shit how much weight we lose. I also throw some stats at them. Like the more we know, the more we can, frame our mind around what's going to happen. So if we know that within a year, people who lose 10% of their body weight are 95% likely to gain it all back and more.
Right.
Or within 5 years, 99% of people will gain it back and more. But it's a lot easier to convey that message when they're receptive to the fact that weight loss isn't our problem. It's weight maintenance.
Yeah.
So strategy, like getting them out of their head of like, if you really like eating low carbs all the time and you find it really easy to adhere to low carbs, let's do it. Let's diet low carb, 100%. The reality is most people don't fall into that box. Most people don't fall into the low fat box either, because chicken and rice cakes doesn't really fit the bill for most people.
Yeah.
But a balanced approach might.
Right.
So, but then you get into, what if that person wants to lose weight, sustain their weight loss, but focus on performance? Well, then we have to dive into, what we know as practitioners is that we want to eat as many carbs as we can to fuel our training. We want to eat the least amount of fats we can to maintain our health. And then we want to eat an adequate amount of protein.
Yeah.
So how you balance that within the day. And if you want to use more of a carb cycling approach to, maybe maximize their insulin sensitivity or get a bit more fancy so that they're in a deficit on their rest days, like a steep deficit on the rest days, and then training days they're at maintenance. Any of those these are all strategies that have worked for myself and my clients, but some of them can't adhere to those. So you have to kind of pepper in your fancy stuff as you can, because adherence, number one. That's what I'm trying to hit home. Yeah. Adherence is number one.
Definitely. So when you have someone who, because you brought this up, which I think is a topic that doesn't get talked about a lot. You have someone that say they're 180 and they want to get to 165, and knowing that they're going to get to 165 is their ultimate goal. But that doesn't mean that when you get to 165, that's actually a sustainable goal for them at that present moment within that current mesocycle of dieting, right? So maybe they're at 2,500 calories and now they're at 1,000 calories to get to 165. Mm-hmm. How do you go about that approach of telling them that, hey, we have to increase your calories and you're probably going to gain weight and we're not going to actually be able to maintain this 165 right now until maybe next year. And once we do this again, like this is a long, continuous process, because you're at 1,000 calories, there's a lot of metabolic ramifications and hormonal ramifications. How do you go about, one, expressing that? And then how do you personally go about getting someone to their goal and then going from there, knowing that they can't maintain that approach?
So one thing that I will do is I use a lot of kind of subjective metrics in my check-ins. Because if someone's eating 1,000 calories, like even if it's a small female who's eating 1,000 calories, they're not going to feel good, right? They're not going to be satiated. They're probably not going to be performing very well. So let them know, hey, your body's fighting us a little bit right now. I think it's time for us to reverse out of this diet, get your metabolism back to baseline, maybe even above baseline, because we've done so much great work here. Then once you've maintained your weight a little bit, usually about as long as the diet or twice as long in an ideal scenario to kind of get back to baseline, is all right. And then we try again. If it's for a weight category and they're just like, I need to make 165, I'm going to get them as close as I can. And then we're going to water cut. And then after the meet, I'll usually, have them find a maintenance again. And then we might cut again. But the big thing that I try to use is preemptively, I will try to avoid metabolic adaptation. And the way in which I do that is I use a very high flux approach. So most of my clients, if it's possible, I try to get them above 8,000 to 10,000 steps a day and keep their food as high as possible. And I've had a lot of success with this, allowing me to not require such a steep calorie deficit from food, because I'm getting it from exercise. And I'm finding that the higher I can keep the food, the more sustainable their weight loss will be. So then when we add back in more food or we decrease the workload a little bit to kind of equalize that calories in, calories out equation, at maintenance, the rebound weight gain from their peak weight loss is much, much lower. So it's kind of twofold. It's you educate the client and let them know that, hey, these are some indicators that I'm looking at. Your body's not responding the way we need it to. Let's start to reverse out of this, and we can try again next time. Most people don't realize how fat they are. I'm going to be straight up. When I started dieting after the hybrid meet, I was like, oh yeah, I'm pretty lean. I can see my abs in the morning. And then 21 weeks later, I'm 215 pounds. I have veins in my abs. I'm like, I'm still pretty fat.
Right.
And then it's like, okay, well, let's get out of this and see where we're at. And it's always in the back of your mind, like, oh, I can get leaner.
Yeah.
Or you'll have the person who's like, yeah, I need to get to 165 because I think I'll be lean at that. And then they get to 165 and they're still chubby and they're like, ugh.
Yeah.
So you kind of let them know that it's a long process. And every time you diet down and get lean, rebound, reverse out and then diet again, you're able to get to that level of leanness that you were looking for easier and past it.
Yeah.
So letting them know that, if we just keep chipping away, taking a rest, chipping away, taking a rest, we're going to get there a lot faster than just trying to fucking crush a calorie deficit and feel like garbage all the time.
Right. Yeah. Now, one of the things psychologically that I run into with some clients is the idea of they have this goal of this is the weight I want to get to, and they're very regimented and they stick to that perfectly. But then as soon as you say, we're going to increase your calories and get healthier, it's almost impossible for them because they don't have that deadline in their mind to stick to it. Right. And then they overeat because they've been somewhat restrictive. And now they have more freedom to eat what they want because their calories are higher, but they tend to always have this issue with overeating, and then they get fatter than when they initially started, because you're actually, the leaner you are, the more susceptible you are to actually occurring more fat gain than you are. The idea of you're in a anabolic state because you're super lean is bro science at best, right? It's the idea that what's going to fill up first is usually your adipose tissue is going to start to fill back out and get a little bit bigger. And then also there's a little bit of, no, I was going to say there's a little bit of science too that shows maybe your actual fat adipose, they actually, multiply. They don't necessarily just shrink which we thought for a while. And now there's some research that shows maybe they're going to actually double, maybe they'll triple, right? And then you just, right. It's like, fuck, man, you can't win anything. So how do you get them to adhere to a reverse diet strategy to where they're allowing themselves to be in the most what have you found to be the best way to get people to adhere to that?
Number one is I try not to get them to a state where they're that depleted, right? So like by using high exercise output or high NEAT, so like keeping their steps high, getting them doing some cardio, but keeping their food as high as I can, then you never get, I shouldn't say you very rarely get those very detrimental metabolic adaptations. The other thing is when your food is still high and your exercise is low, and your exercise is also high, I can start the reverse diet by simply getting you to exercise less. Right? Yeah. I don't have to add any calories. I can just take away some cardio. And you're already happier. The other thing is I let them know that you're going to be really, really hungry. That was the hardest part for me when I reversed out of this diet is I was starving. Even if I was eating 300, 400, 500 calories more per day, starving. And it took about 6 to 8 weeks before that went away. Also remind them that, they have goals to adhere to, right? So if they want to achieve this goal, they have a responsibility. They have agency over their decisions each day, and they can overcome their feelings of hunger. And especially when we're in a situation of exercise high, food high, well, they're already eating quite a bit, right? So as soon as we start decreasing that exercise, they're going to start to feel a little bit better. They're not like keeping the exercise high, keeping the metabolism stoked, as opposed to allowing those adaptations of, the naturally decreasing NEAT, fidgeting less, even blinking. Like I felt when I was super depleted, I was like slower.
Right.
But my NEAT was also still super high, still walking a ton every day. And it made it a lot easier because I never got below 2,700 calories on my diet.
Yeah.
I think you address that recomp phase within the diet itself. That's how I found the best results. Some people can't adhere to a diet like that. So, then you have to get into those lower calorie numbers and push it. You just kind of got to let them know what's going to happen ahead of time. Like if they know what to expect, it's easier to deal with. But if all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, I'm so hungry, I need to eat. And you run into a spot where they're not adherent to what plan, because I know that you're not going to be programming a huge caloric surplus.
Right.
But if they're super hungry and they can't adhere to what's in front of them, well, that's on them. They make those decisions. They put the food in their mouth.
True. Very true. I think also too, being able to set, right? Because, you're setting yourself up for this diet and you have this grandiose idea of like 12 to 16 weeks, I'm going to be super lean and I'm going to be exactly where I want to be at. And then when you get there, where do you set the goal at, right? What's attainable? What are the expectations? And I think a lot of them don't really fully understand what their next goal should be. So then it's harder for them to visualize and stick to the plan a little bit better, right? Like, how do you explain to someone that, hey, your next goal is to add 5 pounds of lean muscle, because all muscle is lean muscle,
I love
right?
That.
Yeah. 5 pounds of muscle, but you may gain 15 pounds overall in the next 6 to 8 months. Like that's hard for someone to grasp who's just dieted down to maybe their leanest body they've ever had, right? So mentally and psychologically, how do you get them to buy into that? Do you set smaller, more tangible goals, like weekly goals with them, or what have you found to be like that best approach? Because the idea of just being like, hey, you have goals and responsibilities within those goals doesn't seem like that's like super.
No. So those are two separate scenarios, right? So the initial scenario was somebody who wanted to get to a certain weight, hit a roadblock, and you have to reverse out and then try again. So in that instance, I wouldn't set a weight gain goal per week. I would just say, hey, we're going to start to add some calories. We're going to see if we can keep your weight at maintenance, like typically maybe 20% higher than what you did. So like if you lost 40 pounds, you might gain, 7 to 10 pounds back. That's okay. Yeah. But the goal is to drive the food up without the weight coming up as much.
Do you think it's good to set an expectation like that?
Yeah, oh, I do, for sure. I'm like, listen,
Okay.
you're not going to maintain this weight. It's going to come up. You might feel like you're getting fluffy. Just let it happen. I will make sure to modulate your calories and make sure you don't gain too fast. Now, the other scenario is somebody who has done a cut and then wants to gain muscle mass. You know, there are guidelines out there that you try to gain. I think a ballpark was like, 1 pound a week. And to me, if you're trying to maintain body composition, that's really fast.
Yeah.
4 pounds a month, you run a 6-month bulk, quote unquote, like that's 24 pounds. Like that's a lot of body weight.
I think it's 0.5 to 1% a week is what you want to get.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me at 200, let's say 200 pounds, like 2 pounds a week, that's a lot of body weight.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of take the same approach as I do when dieting, like do it nice and slow. As long as that number continues to come up, we're in a good spot. The slower we can do it, the better. Again, we're avoiding these metabolic adaptations that happen because the same way we metabolically adapt to weight loss, we're going to metabolically adapt to weight gain. We're going to become insulin resistant. We're going to, we're going to be lethargic as well. As we start eating a ton of food, you're not going to want to move a lot. Avoiding those through, again, I like to keep the exercise high. Like that 8 to 10,000 steps is kind of my baseline for everybody. I do have some heavier athletes. Like I was working with Dan Misanchik for a while, and I was like, bro, do not exceed 8,000 steps because you're eating 9,000 calories a day. like stop moving.
Right.
But that's the exception to the rule. So again, I don't like putting numbers out there. Like I don't like saying, we're gonna get you to gain 20 pounds. Maybe your body doesn't want to gain 20 pounds.
Right.
Like I have a client actually. He just did his check-in today this morning. When he started with me, he weighed about 205, and he was eating 2,800 calories a day on training days. We dieted him down to 198 for a meet, and he weighed like he just walked into his weigh-in, and now he's back up to about 206. So 1 pound weight gain. He's eating 1,200 calories more on his training days now.
Yeah.
Fuck, man, that's a terrific situation to be in from a metabolic perspective. You're turning over so many more calories. There's so much more opportunity for protein turnover and muscle gain. That, like, to me, if we keep getting his calories up and he keeps gaining nice and slow, a half pound to a pound a week, he's going to be eating a ton of food, and that's great.
Yeah.
The higher you can push your food, the better, in my opinion. The more food you can eat in either situation, the better, because the more chance that training is fueling your insulin sensitivity. You're putting those carbs and proteins into the muscle. That's the ideal scenario. So putting this time cap of like, I want to gain 1 to 2 pounds a week over 16 weeks, and that's my timeline. Well, maybe we do it nice and slow. You only gain 8 pounds, but 4 of that is muscle mass.
Right.
Who's to say that's not, like, to me, that's successful? I'd rather gain 4 pounds of muscle with 8 pounds of total weight gain than 4 pounds of muscle and 20 pounds of total weight gain. And maybe I'm not going to put on the muscle as fast as I would if I was in that like steep surplus, but I'm also not going to be putting on that body weight. I'm not going to be uncomfortably overweight. Like anyone who's gained 20 pounds within a time frame knows how uncomfortable that feels.
Oh yeah, it can ruin your training in a heartbeat,
exactly.
for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I think the research that I've seen on the weight gain stuff, I think it was 500 calorie surplus versus a 250. I could be wrong on the numbers exactly, but it was a bodybuilding study. And I think the group who was in the higher calorie surplus put on more muscle, but they put on significantly more fat. Whereas the group who was in a smaller surplus maybe put on 1 to 1.5 kilos less, but maybe like 4 to 5 kilos of less overall fat as well. So the idea is like, I guess it just depends, right? Depends on where you're at. If you're like a super skinny person who has not a lot of muscle on them, but you're relatively lean, maybe we could push that surplus a little bit harder because you have a hard time putting on muscle. If you're someone that's naturally fat, then it's going to be like a very much slow and methodical process. There's nuances to everything. But I definitely agree with you. And this is also under the context that these people aren't getting on stage. They're not getting so lean to where they're going to have some type of hormonal dysregulation. Because if they do have some type of hormonal dysregulation, then it's your job as a coach to get that back to normal as fast as possible. So you may actually be in a heavier surplus in the very beginning, just to make sure that the hormones are regulating as much. Because I've seen case studies where one that always jumps out to me is this lady did a diet and it took her 72 weeks to regain her menstrual cycle afterwards.
Well, the amount of like pituitary and dysregulation, and I mean, my ex-wife's dealing with it right now. She hasn't had a menstrual cycle. I don't know her for a long time.
Who cares?
That's true, but it's still a good friend of mine. She's dealing with
It's
dealing with amenorrhea right now, and it's affecting her thyroid. Her anxiety and depression is way up. She's not able to train the same way as she used to, and it's not because of over dieting. It's just because she trained too hard.
Yeah, the idea of energy availability, that model that allows you to know when you're at a point where you're going to start creating hormonal dysfunction, is something that needs to be looked at, especially for high level athletes that are trying to maintain a certain body composition. Because I know she's CrossFit competitor, so she's probably training 2 to 3 times a day, maybe, and trying to stay
twice usually.
It's trying to stay as lean as possible, and that comes at an energy availability that's not sustainable. And I think a lot of nutrition coaches don't fully understand the components of how important it is to keep someone's menstrual cycle in place, whether they want to or not. It's like you have to be able to explain to them the health ramifications of losing your period, and the desire to want to lose your period is something that's not going to be good in the long run.
Well, the other piece is that a lot of the times we won't see these ramifications when they're happening because they artificially have a menstrual cycle from birth control. Right. Yeah. So that compounds the issue, especially for a well-meaning coach. They might not see the signs there. Yeah. But returning to the original point of weight gain, you also need to look at, am I gaining weight so that I can just lose it again and display my muscle, right? Because the more body fat that you gain during your bulk phase, we'll use that term, the more body fat I have to take off, which means that the means in which I have to take to get that body fat off will be a little bit more severe, which means I will tend to lose more muscle in the process. So if I just do it a little bit slower, swaying back and forth on that pendulum each way, to me, it moves the muscle needle slower, but that muscle needle keeps moving in that upward direction.
Yeah.
Rather than these big ebbs and flows, right?
Yeah, for sure. I also think your body responds to things a lot better when you're leaner as well, in all aspects, right?
I would know I'm fucking shredded, bro.
Jesus Christ. But yeah, the idea that your body's going to, not produce as much estrogen, you're not going to hold as much water. The fatter you get, the more metabolically resistant you get to, anything that you do, whether it be trying to put on muscle or any of those things. So I think it's a good idea to always keep that in mind. Do you have a idea in terms of rate of weight loss and rate of weight gain that's ideal? Or do you look at it in terms of when you're trying to lose weight, performance is the main driver of the rate of weight loss? And then if you're trying to gain weight, the calories are the main driver for that. Like for me, whenever someone's trying to gain weight, I'm always just telling them, look, the idea is to get your calories up as much as we can so that you don't get overly fat as well. If your weight goes to a certain number, it goes to a certain number. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I'm not concerned about your weight as much as I'm concerned about how many calories we get in your body as well. And the same thing with the diet, right? Like I'm not totally concerned with what number the scale says. Are you still able to perform at a high level in the gym? Because once that performance starts to drop, then we automatically assume, or we should, I don't think there's much research to back it up, but in my mind, if your performance is dropping, you're not, you're losing muscle.
Yeah.
For sure. And you're overly fatigued and under recovered, right? That's an issue.
I'm the same. The other thing that we need to factor in is like, we're not, for the most part, we're not coaching physique athletes, right? So
right.
I need to protect that training session as much as I can for my clients because they are performance athletes. They're sport athletes, or they're power lifters, if you want to call powerlifters athletes. They are yeah. Their training session is the stimulus for them to get stronger and or maintain their strength, their dieting. So as soon as that starts to suffer, we need to rejig things. Whether it be to drop the training volume so that they can recover a little bit more, which is not an ideal scenario. I let the training and the lifestyle metrics guide my decision-making a little bit more. If we're trying to fit into a weight class, that does it puts a kink into things. And that, again, that brings into the nuance of the situation. But with weight gain, it's definitely just get in as many calories as we can. If I see that needle coming up, 0.8 pounds a week on average, or 0.6 pounds a week on average, like, I'm okay with that. As long as the calories keep going up, we're in a good spot.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of really good success with that nice, slow, methodical approach. And it's also easier to adhere to, right? As soon as you start force feeding or excessively restricting, you want to gateway into someone's mentality, take away their food, or ask them to overeat.
Yeah.
Oh, man. I might not be a psychologist, but I'm pretty freaking close at this point. You know what I mean?
Right. For sure. One of the things you just brought up too, which I think would be a good point and way to end this conversation, is when you are just dealing with someone's nutrition and they're starting to hit these performance decrements, how do you work within their paradigm of athlete, their training coach, and your nutrition stuff, right? How do you tell the coach, hey, this is the person's calories. I see your training volume. They're doing 30 working sets a week. Maybe could we reduce that to 20? Like, how do you have that communication in a successful manner to where the athlete is the most important thing for you and the other coach?
I think that communication in that instance is key. Like, I was coaching an athlete with, so it was one of Ryan Silva's athletes. And he actually messaged me. He's like, hey, we're going to be putting up her volume like crazy. She wants to gain some weight. Let's work together. Let's do this. It's like, she's sick. Let's do it. But we got to a point where her lifestyle wasn't conducive to her eating enough, and her appetite dropped like crazy. So, we went back and forth a little bit, and we figured out a solution. With her weight loss heading into her previous meet, I just shot him a message, and I'm like, hey, is she performing the way that you want her to? He was like, yeah, everything's good. So as long as you maintain that open communication, and it doesn't have to be some elaborate email of like, our metrics are showing that blah, blah, blah. You're not doing this. You're not doing that. This is how the athlete is conveying their subjective metrics to me. Are you seeing the same things? Or are you seeing something like, if the athlete's telling me, hey, I'm doing great, but the coach is like, hey man, she's not hitting her numbers at all. We're not in a good spot. We need to change something. That's a perfect opportunity to open dialogue with everybody.
Yeah.
Send an email or a group text or whatever it is, and just say, hey, let's all work together, because the athlete, again, as you said, is number one. Their success is number one. Like, I don't have an ego in any of this. I legitimately don't care what the person does as long as they get to where they need to go.
Right.
And to me, if they're able to do that, then I've done my job. Right. So I'm not tied to any method or any system. It's what can we get you to adhere to, and what's going to work within your goals. And I think the more people involved in that, the better. Like, the more brains working together, man, as long as neither of you have an ego, you can accomplish some pretty cool stuff.
So then the next question would be, well, how do you deal with someone with an ego to still get the best for the athlete? Because that's going to happen. I mean, for some reason within the coaching paradigm of powerlifting, which is beyond my capabilities of understanding, there's a lot of egocentric coaches out there. And a lot of them, like, I don't know who you just mentioned. I don't know that person that you just mentioned, but he sounds like he was open-minded as a coach, which is like,
he works with JP Price.
Still doesn't do anything for me, but it's fine. It's fine. It's not a big deal. We don't have to go into that. But It sounds like he's an open-minded coach, but there's a lot that aren't. There's a lot that would immediately be like, it's your diet, it's your nutrition coach. You need to do something different, right? So how do you openly, how have you found success in conversing with someone that has a big ego, if you've ever dealt with that? And if you haven't, what do you think would be like the appropriate way to go about that?
So I haven't had to deal with that. I'll be completely honest. And I think part of the reason is that I've garnered a bit of respect in terms of what I do, and people know that I know what I'm talking about.
Oh, look at you.
And you know, yeah, but that's the reality of the situation. It's like no one's going to call you out on your training or Trevor on his training. You guys have the respect of people in the industry. And what I would do is say, hey, like, here are the hard facts. This person is eating an adequate amount of food. Her weight has been coming down, or his weight has been coming down an appropriate amount each week. We have a deadline to get to X. She's not recovering. It's not the diet. And then, you know, you open up the dialogue, ask them to send over the training. I'll happily send over the nutrition plan. I'm an open book. I will share anything. The more eyes we have on this, the better. The one thing I do try to do is keep my training recommendations out of it.
Yeah.
Right. I will never, like, as much as I know about training, I will never tell another coach how to coach somebody. That's not that to me is overstepping. The only time in which I've had a problem is when the coach undermines my ability to get an athlete to weight. I have had that happen where I've given recommendations on like water manipulation, food manipulation, things like that. I'm very much let the water do its job. We're not going to fuck with our calories too much until the end. You know, we'll let the end do the work. And I've never had an athlete miss weight. I had one athlete have their coach in their ear. She had cut her carbs 4 days out, and she only had to cut 3 pounds. I was like, "What the fuck are you doing, man?" She ended up having a shit meat, and I was like,
"Of course,
come on." So my response to the athlete was like, "What are you paying me for?"
Yeah.
Right. You're paying me to give you my advice on your nutrition. You're paying him to give you his advice on your training. I'm not stepping on his toes. Please don't allow him to step on mine. And that was the end of the conversation. I haven't had the same issue again. So, I mean, I'm very big on communication. I'm very big on honesty and transparency. And if you do that, it should be a pretty easy situation to navigate.
Yeah. For sure. No, I agree. I think the open communication thing is so important because athletes are so, you know, they hire you for a reason, right? So they're going to respect your opinion, but for some reason they equally respect the opinions of others, right? We see this all the time where, you know, even unsolicited advice. I know there's coaches that slide into lifters' DMs to give unsolicited advice to hope that they're going to be able to recruit them over as an athlete. Right. But the idea of if your athlete is working with you for nutrition and then she's working with her other person for strength training, she's going to respect both opinions. And if one person says one thing, she may just blindly follow it, negating what you said. So it's hard to fully comprehend how that situation can manifest itself in order for you to communicate that. But it's something that you have to be aware of, you know, that not only are you communicating with the, coach, but you're also communicating heavily with the athlete as well in a dualistic approach to where you're all on the same page.
Well, like I'm in a situation right now where I have Trevor does my programming. I'm going to be 8 weeks out from a meet, deloading right now. Not really recovering well. And I have another coach who is helping me with my rehab work, who's actually Trevor's coach too. So the coach helping me with my rehab work has made a couple of recommendations of things that we might look at changing. So what am I going to do? I'm going to say, hey, Trevor, Matt's made these recommendations. This is what he's done with another athlete. What do you think of this? You're the decision maker. Tell me what to do. Right. And for me, it's just, I think this might be a good idea. What do you think? Ultimately, I trust you. So we're going to go with your plan no matter what. Let me know.
Yeah. I like that.
That's all you can do. Right. It's not stepping on anyone's toes. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask because I think it's a good idea. But at the same time, I know like Trevor's prepared me for 2 meets now and I've done very well at both of them. So I know he knows what he's doing. So the trust is there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Creating that buy-in and trust is extremely important.
For sure.
That's one of the first things you should start initiating with your client and athlete is that trust buy-in factor. And you do that through communication, you do that through education and results. Those are the three things that get people to buy in. And that's the three things that I would focus on from the very beginning, right? And then the results come later on down the road. So no, awesome, man. I appreciate you coming on the show and giving us some insight into your nutrition. And I think that the discussion of communication, the discussion of the psychological side of things is way more important than the numbers, right? You can fucking go on Google Scholar and find the numbers that you need to put any diet into play, but none of that will get them to where they need to be unless you have that perfect relationship and you're able to convey the messages that you want to convey to create adherence and buy-in. So I appreciate you doing that. If people want to hire you as a coach or follow you, how can they do that? And also talk a little bit about Metrilife if you want to as well.
Sure. So I actually just put an Instagram page for my business, Master Athletic Performance. You can also follow me at Paul Oneid. And then Metrilife is in, so we still have the free version of Metrilife going. There's also a premium version as well. We're actually trying to get involved and having some success getting involved in veteran-owned businesses. So we're trying to partner with those, especially as a tool to help people help themselves in an industry in which mental health is quite stigmatized. Yep. We feel like there's an opportunity to help people. And we made that free version at the beginning of the pandemic to give people a tool to help manage their mental health and well-being during this very challenging time. If anyone needs to learn more, they can DM me or they can follow Metrilife on Instagram or visit www.metrilife.com. Again, it is a free download. And if you want to sign up for the premium version, you can go ahead and do that as well.
Awesome, man. Thank you. I appreciate it. And then if you guys are interested and really find what Paul said to be extremely valuable, him, myself, Riley, and Trevor just started Coach's Corner University, where we'll be having these super in-depth lecture type conversations, providing lectures, providing case studies, pretty much anything you need to know at a high university level to become the best coach within the dynamics of strength training, nutrition, supplements, psychology, how to grow your business, how to start a business, how to keep it running. We're going to cover all that in great detail at Coach's Corner University, coachescorneru.com. You can follow it on Instagram as well, Coach's Corner U. And we're going to be starting to put up a bunch of content, kind of going over and explaining that a little bit more detail. And we'll be set to launch the site in early January. So stay tuned for that and stay up to date with all that stuff by going to the website, putting in your email, and you'll get notifications when things are coming out and stuff. So if that is something that you're interested in and you have any questions, just let us know by shooting us a message. Paul, very thankful for your time. Very insightful conversation, man. And I look forward to having many more.
Absolutely. Thanks, man.